Russian President Vladimir Putin's war of aggression against Ukraine enters its 7th week. The past week has been overshadowed by the revelation of horrific war crimes committed en masse by Russian troops in the towns north and east of Kyiv, in Bucha, and in several other towns as well. Meanwhile, Russian troops have been mostly forced out of the north, but are being redeployed to the east and south, with major Russian offensives to be expected in Kharkiv, in the Donbass, in the land corridor towards Crimea, possibly beyond all the way to Odessa. The EU, the UK, and the United States have strongly condemned the crimes against humanity, with a new sanction package agreed by the EU yesterday, which include a coal embargo for the first time. Across the EU, there have been a mass expulsion of Russian diplomats, i.e. spies working for the various Russian secret services, 40 alone in Germany, and with one tally by The Economist defense editor Shang Joshi, gauging the overall number at a staggering 385 diplomats being expelled. But now let's turn to Rolf Nikel for his first assessment.
I would like to talk about the expulsion of the diplomats, Russian diplomats. I would like to talk about the 5th sanction package and about further measures that are presently under consideration. Now, as Henning has already pointed out, Germany has expelled 40 diplomats along with most other European countries in different numbers. As Henning pointed out, I can't confirm the number, but it sounds pretty reasonable when you 385 when you look at who actually participated in this mass expulsion. When it comes to Germany, it has been officially coordinated with France, but not with the others. So these are individual decisions. The only one who apparently is not part of the package are the Hungarians. The expulsion per se is not an unusual instrument, as we know, to signal dissatisfaction with the behavior of another state or its agents. Germany had, for example, expelled 4 diplomats, Russian diplomats, in connection with the Tiergarten murder. But this time is pretty significant because Germany has never expelled such a large number of diplomats, firstly, but also the link between the act that caused us dissatisfaction this time, which is, of course, the massacre in Bucha, and the diplomats concerned by the expulsion is relatively weak. So it was very strong in the Tiergarten case because the agents were involved in the case. So it's really a clear signal of violation of international norms to which Germany and other European countries had to respond. It is to be assumed that Russian counter-sanctions will follow. Expulsions in the same range probably are to be expected. But this is already figured into the German decision. The problem is that the Russian embassy in Berlin is bigger than the German embassy in Moscow. So a possible symmetrical reaction by the Russian side may hurt quite considerably in comparison. On the other hand, right now, there's not much going on in terms of bilateral exchange programs, consular cases, or economic cooperation. So I would assume that a number of people in the German embassy in Moscow are not quite overworked at this time. So we'll have to see how this plays out. But in any case, it's a very strong signal of dissatisfaction on the diplomatic side that has been expressed by this mass expulsion of Russian diplomats. Now, the 5th sanction package, which started out in the elaboration phase as relatively weak, sort of closing loopholes of former sanction packages, but now it has become pretty substantial, though it does still not contain oil and gas. It is to be decided by COREPER today at the meeting of the ambassadors, and then will have to be confirmed by the ministers in the written procedure. Last night, the negotiations were still ongoing. As everybody knows, unanimity is required. Germany is on board. The only, how can I say, difficult country at the moment is Hungary. probably on board on this one, but Orban has said in a public speech that he would not support oil and gas measures if that were in a further package, which is quite likely. So the proposal contains a ban on import of coal. This is in the value of about 4 billion euro per year. For Germany alone, 2.2 billion for last year. And when it comes to Germany, more than half of German coal is imported from Russia. But imports can be substituted relatively easily. And Germany wants to get out of Russian coal by the fall of this year anyway. The modalities were last night still under consideration. I have to have a small question mark, because there was a question of the transition mechanism, how long it would be possible to still continue. 3 months is in discussion. I'm not exactly sure where we stand this morning before the meeting of the COREPER. The second point is a blocking of EU ports for Russian ships. That is also something that has been asked for quite loudly by the Ukrainian side. The exceptions are here humanitarian goods and energy. So oil could still be delivered even under these sanction measures. There is a listing of 4 more banks, including the second largest one, VTB, which accounts for 23% of the market. The 2 most important banks, Gazprom Bank and Sberbank, are still not part of the package because they are important for oil and gas. The 4th measure is a listing of about 200 new persons and essentially members of the family of listed individuals, including the 2 daughters of President Putin, and 18 new entities. There's also the blocking of export of some high-tech goods, including quantum computers, in a value of about 10 billion euros. There's also blocking of import. That may be bad news for some of you because it includes caviar and vodka, wood and concrete products. So this is the package. It will most likely be adopted this morning, and it is a further step forward. It does not contain oil and gas, but in comparison to what it looked when it was started, sort of filling loopholes, it has become quite substantial. Now, there's other measures also under consideration at the moment. The first one is the expulsion from Russia from the Human Rights Council. The US is pushing this very hard. A 2/3 majority in the General Assembly of the United Nations would be required. If the majorities stay the same as they were in previous decisions by the General Assembly, the votes would be enough. But still, the United Nations is sometimes not very predictable, and so a massive démarche action is underway to make sure that the majority that the 2/3 majority in the General Assembly is ensured. The other thing that President Zelensky asked for when he appeared in front of the Security Council was the expulsion of Russia from the Security Council. This is a non-starter because it's subject to veto in the Security Council, so Russia could block it at any time, and probably other countries, China, would follow. The third point that is under discussion is the accountability question. And that is that International Criminal Court and national prosecution authorities are collecting evidence for war crimes and are securing proof for atrocities committed. The crime of aggression itself cannot be prosecuted by the ICC, by the International Criminal Court, if the state concerned is not part of the Rome Statute. So Russia is not part of the Rome Statute. So Putin could not be prosecuted for the crime of aggression. However, if the lines of responsibility for war crimes can be established for the massacre of Bucha or other things, and it lead to the top, then he could be criminally responsible. But of course, this is a long-term procedure. But the process has started now. The problem, of course, afterwards would be implementation of such a decision. But the example of Milosevic in Belgrade after he lost power is powerful. It's all in the long term, and investigations are, of course, when they start now, a powerful tool to delegitimize the Russian president. The problem here is that if there is a ceasefire agreement or even a peace agreement, which is unlikely at the moment, he would probably be needed for such a thing. So this is a rather a long-term prospect. There's also some discussion on the expulsion of Russia from the G20. But that again is a non-starter, I would say, because it requires unanimity, and he won't get unanimity in that big group. So maybe that's all for me for now, and I'm ready to answer questions later on. Thank you.
Let's move on now straight to Jolanta, please, for her sort of assessment of the situation of refugees in Poland, and maybe sort of even a little bit more generally where Poland stands in this whole crisis.
Poland received already 2.5 million Ukrainian refugees. According to the Polish border guards, the situation at the border is heading towards stabilization. At the beginning of the invasion, the border was exceeded by over 100,000 people a day. Currently, it's about 30,000. And the border capacity is about 50,000 per day. And some of refugees who initially came to Poland already left to the other countries, but it is estimated that due to geographical and linguistic proximity, and of course the numerous representation of Ukrainian minority, most of the refugees will remain in Poland. In this first phase, in first weeks of the refugee crisis, non-governmental organization and society have played a key role in providing humanitarian aid and and assistance to refugees. We have already some social surveys about this involvement of citizens in the process of helping. So according to the recent survey, 80% of Polish citizens became involved in helping refugees. Almost every second person among the helpers decided to do shopping with the most needed products, while every fifth person decided to help as a volunteer. So it's a huge social mobilization. Of which I can say personally, as a citizen, I'm proud of, and I think it's a very huge effort of society that should be appreciated. And for Poland, with a little experience in managing migration, the current refugee crisis may be, of course, a turning point in development of national migration policy. the growing scale of needs and nature of challenges related to this migration flow require intensified cooperation of local and central authorities to develop the long-term migration strategy. What the government already did on 12th of March, a special law was adopted, allowing Ukrainians to cross the border after the invasion, legal access to labor markets, medical care, and all the child and family benefits up to 18 months. And to gain this right, refugees need to register and get a special identification number. It's called PESEL, the number that all the citizens, Polish citizens have. And latest statistics from this PESEL show that more than 700,000 refugees already registered in the system, of which almost 50% are children, 44% are women between, sorry for my cat, are women between 18 and 65 years. Only 3% are men between 18 and 65, and more than 3% are older people older than 65. So in short, 94% of newcomers are women with children. And the question is now how to adopt those people to the labor market in Poland. As you probably know, the labor situation, the situation at the Polish market is quite good. The unemployment rate in Poland was, according to Eurostat, about 3% only. So there is actually a huge demand for labor force. But the first research showed that there can be a problem with the structure of this migration, as it doesn't match perfectly to the market needs. As in Poland, there is a demand mainly for industrial workers, construction workers, IT workers. That's why we will for sure need a lot of money for adaptation of refugees to the market needs. The huge share of children is also a huge challenge for our educational system. We are actually having our own problems with founding the education system. So this huge wave of Ukrainian children will also need more spending on this educational system. This is a challenge of course, for the future. Actually, we are trying to cope. I mean, the government is trying to cope with this challenge already, but it's not really easy, as most of the children don't know the language. So it's not so easy, of course, to adopt them very fast to the educational system. But we need to say that most of them decided to attend classes. So most of the children that gained this registration and PESEL number decide to to attend classes in Polish schools. Of course, to meet all the challenges related with refugee crisis, we need support from the European Union, and this aid already declared by the European Commission from EU budget requires quick and efficient distribution in Poland, but also, I guess, in other countries hosting refugees. In my opinion, Poland should also cooperate with other member states, more experience in accepting refugees, in building this national reception capability and migration policy. As you probably know, the Polish government was always against the mandatory relocation system. And in fact, the government is still against the mandatory relocation. But as we can hear, at least from a minister, from press conferences, they would welcome actually voluntary relocation, but other member states, or at least some efforts to facilitate the transfer of refugees in the EU territory. So I think it would be good to create all those special programs aimed at refugees, offering them not only logistical support in moving, but also some integration programs in other member states to get ready for potential other waves of people who could come.
Very interesting. With a sort of one eye on the clock, I think we should move on quickly now to Stanislav for his assessment on the situation in Moldova. Moldova is not an EU country, as I think everyone knows, but it's in a very peculiar situation, which Stanislav will probably elaborate.
I will try to cover briefly 3 issues. What happens to Ukrainian refugees in Moldova? The second, implications of refugees crisis for Moldovan government and how Moldova copes with this. And the last, the needs of Moldova, what can be done in the coming weeks and months. First point, what happens with Ukrainian refugees in Moldova? I think around 300,000 crossed Moldova via 2 green corridors created, established in cooperation with Romanian government. So basically, refugees had option to cross Moldova by train or by bus directly to the Romanian border. Recently, Moldova reopened partially its airspace, so there is option as well for refugees to be relocated by air. 94,000 of refugees decided to stay in Moldova, and more than 6,000 applied for asylum. In terms of accommodation, around 80 to 90% of all refugees have been accommodated in the private sector, be it that they're living with their relatives. And just to remind you that 6% of Moldovan population are Ukrainians. So there is this option that they're living with their relatives, but also majority of them are living with families of volunteers who've opened their houses for Ukrainian refugees. And only around 10% have been accommodated in the shelters provided by local authorities or central authorities. Demographics, it's the same like in Poland. Half of them are women and half of them are minors. So 47,000 of Ukrainian refugees are kids. As well, Moldovan government opened for them the right to work, and so far we have been, in statistics, have seen 180 people who found job in Moldova. It's not a big number because many of them, especially in the first days, thought that they came only for 1 or 2 weeks, but I think if they will stay longer, more of them will be looking for a job in Moldova. I think some of the refugees, Ukrainian refugees from the first wave, became volunteers themselves. So they are welcoming the second, third wave of Ukrainian refugees and help them to accommodate. Ukrainian parents filed around 1,700 applications for schooling and kindergartens. So basically, this is the number of kids who have been integrated in the educational institutions of Moldova. Obviously, Russian language facilitates the easy integration from the very first day. And Russian schools in Moldova as well facilitate the education process and smooth integration. Refugees who arrived to Moldova, many of them got the prepaid cards from local telecom companies. Some banks as well reduced the commission on the withdrawal of money by the holders of Ukrainian bank cards. And UN Refugees Agency started to release some payments for Ukrainian refugees, monthly payments, but also for those who accommodate them, so for Moldovan families. Implications for Moldova and how government deals with this. First, it's unprecedented refugees crisis for Moldova. Moldova never been confronted with such a big influx. Just for comparison, last year there were 400 refugees and 61 applications for asylum. Yeah, you just look at the numbers and you'll see the scale of crisis. Basically, just in 1 month, the population of Moldova increased by 4%. Basically, Moldova added a population of another city. Obviously, government would not make it alone without impressive mobilization of volunteers, which caught by surprise everyone in Moldova. And I think it's a good example of society, civic activism and openness. Despite the assistance from volunteers, Moldovan government had a huge financial spendings. Basically, in 1 month, government reported to be spent directly and indirectly 10 million euros. I mean, maybe it's peanuts for a rich country. For poorest country in Europe, it's a lot of money. And obviously, it creates a hole in the budget, which is already big one, the hole, because of escalating energy prices from the last October. It forced as well Moldovan government to reallocate police forces from the safe border, from Romanian border, to the Ukrainian border in order to be able to filter the traffic and as well to ensure effective monitoring of border. Inflow of refugees obviously increased the pressure on the health system, which was before under the pressure because of COVID pandemic. Now there is a demand for medicine, but also with all half of the refugees being kids, there is as well a problem of ensuring effective vaccination campaign, which has been interrupted when they left their country. Then there were attempts as well by pro-Russian parties in Moldova, and then they controlled media outlets to fuel anti-refugees sentiments. Briefly about the needs of Moldova, if I look ahead, I think first of all, what will help a lot if UN agencies will speed up payments to refugees. The process is still very slow and people are short of money. But also maybe instead of one single payment to Moldovan families who accommodate refugees, to turn it into something monthly, as long as they host the families. Second element, of course, Moldova will receive everyone who will try to enter from Ukraine, but also there is a limit to how much Moldova can accommodate. So far, there were no tent camps, refugees camps in Moldova, but if the fighting intensifies in around Odessa, the inflow will be much bigger. So what will help Moldova is now reallocation of refugees from Moldova to other European countries. It will help to leave a burden from Moldova, but also probably it will help to prepare for the next potential wave. increase of medical supplies, vaccines, which are needed to conduct the vaccination of refugees, especially minors, will help a lot. As well, any help in terms of building the capacity of Moldovan border police to monitor border traffic, but also to monitor much better the crossing points. I think the deployment of a Frontex, around 100 people, is a good start, but the mission has to be increased. And then any donations from EU member states in terms of night vision equipment, thermal equipment will be of great help for Moldovan border police. And then I think the last point, we have not to forget that Moldova is facing triple crisis. Its energy crisis, its refugees crisis, and its economic crisis. Moldova was supposed to grow by 8 or 9% this year, but now the projections of economic stagnation, it's about 0.3% and maybe even worse. So basically, it creates fertile ground for destabilization by Russian political clients in Moldova. What is essential to provide financial help to the Moldovan government, which will help to offset effects of economic crisis, will help to accommodate refugees, and will channel some money for economic development. I think I will stop here, and I will be happy to answer any questions.
Yes, please. Sort of, if you have a question and would like to ask them yourself, raise your hand. I already see one up. But before we go to you, maybe one quick question to Jolanta, but maybe Rolf also wants to come in. In how far is the situation different this time from the refugee crisis in 2015? Is this sort of, do you have a sense sort of what the atmosphere is? Why the atmosphere is so different, and also to the role of the EU. You have already sort of alluded to that, Stanislav, as well. Sort of, is the sort of general feeling in the country that the EU is doing enough? With von der Leyen and Borrell are on their way to Kiev today. I think they will be meeting the President Zelensky today. Is the role of the EU in the crisis sort of seen as sufficient or not?
For Poland, the situation when we compare current crisis and the crisis of 2015 is completely different, because now we are directly touched by this crisis. If you ask about the perception of people, I think that we still cannot really say, because if we remember 2015, we also remember that at the beginning, the perception and people in Europe were very open for refugees, and then suddenly the atmosphere changed, and countries were not very open for migrants. This time, of course, at least in Poland, I can say that people are very open, because they have the feeling that first it's a directly neighbor country, that we can also be affected by this war and this kind of invasion. And we know Ukrainian quite well, because they already exist in our society, and they have a lot of relatives. So that's my explanation. And when it comes to the government approach, I think it's not so much different, actually, when it's come to Polish government. As I mentioned, Polish government was always against this mandatory relocation, and that's why the first priority for Polish government is now the financial aid. As you can see, the Polish government is also not inviting Frontex for standing court, as Polish border guard is convinced that that they can do it by themselves, in a more effective manner. So they use support by EU institutions only when it's really helpful in, so for example, in return operations supported by Frontex, return of or people to Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and so on and so on. So when it comes to the approach of the government, it's actually pretty the same. Of course, the situation is different because now we are affected directly. When it comes to assessment of EU reaction, I think that the Polish assessment is that, of course, we should do more and quicker. I mean, that we need for sure more sanctions and quick sanctions. And also bigger support to Ukraine in this military way. Yeah. So, and of course, when we talk about the refugee crisis, we will see with time, I mean, how our needs will change with time, and the position of the government may also somehow change, but at least for now, I don't see any huge differences actually.
Thank you very much. Rolf, do you want to come in just for one comment, or?
If you want to have solidarity in Poland, and I should say, first of all, it's absolutely remarkable and admirable what Poland is doing. But if you want to have solidarity in the long run, solidarity does not only mean solidarity for refugees from neighboring countries that happen to be useful for the labor market. Solidarity is a broader concept, and I think there's room for, should I say, improvement on the part of the Polish government. Thank you.
And maybe just to Stanislav very shortly, how is the EU seen in Moldova? And maybe a quick additional question: the situation in Transnistria, where Russian peacekeepers are stationed, are present. Do they play a role as well?
I think in Chisinau, first EU reaction was assessed as slow and not understanding the scale of the crisis and impact on Moldova. 1 month into the war, I think the assessment is better, that EU put its act together, the assistance is coming, but much more needs to be done. Second thing, in Chisinau, the preoccupation is what will happen in and around Odessa. And of course, there is expectation that EU provide much bigger help to Ukrainian army to stop Russians in the eastern of Ukraine, because it's a natural barrier which separates Transnistria from Russian troops. And now to Transnistria, I think Transnistrian mass media reported that there are around 17,000 Ukrainian refugees in Transnistria. Don't forget that 30% of the population in Transnistria are Ukrainians as well. There are a lot of relatives living there. In 1992, there were reported cases that Transnistrians during the war found refuge in Ukraine in 1992. Now it goes the other way around. Ukrainians are coming to Transnistria to find refuge from the war. Obviously, the situation is difficult in Transnistria because food and medicine were imported from Ukraine via Odessa. Now, this transit point is not available anymore. Basically, Transnistria relies much more now on imports via Moldova proper. There are around 2,000 Russian troops in Transnistria. Not all of them are Russians or Russians from Russia. There are many locals who are serving in the Russian army, having a Russian passport. Ukrainians blew up the railway bridge, I think the first week of infighting, in order to prevent any inflow of heavy military equipment from Transnistria into Odessa in case of an offensive. Situation is tense, but relatively stable, and I think many things will depend on what happens in the south of Ukraine. And I think there was a question about Moldovan refugees in Moldova, just to be more precise. So 94% of refugees who entered Moldova decided to stay in. 90% of them are Ukrainians. 4% of them are foreigners from Ukraine who entered Moldova and decided to stay in. Yeah, between 80 to 90%, 80% have been accommodated with families in Moldova. Contribution of the private sector. So I've mentioned 10 million which government spent in the first month. Moldovans donated around 1.75 million euro during this crisis in the first month, which is impressive sum for such a poor country.
Okay. Thank you very much, Stanislav. Let's go to the questions now. Jolanta, please.
Okay, thank you very much for all these questions. I have to say at the beginning that as an expert on migration, I very often have to answer to this question about difference between situation at the Polish-Belarusian border and Polish-Ukrainian border. And last week I had a meeting with Polish border guard representatives because they know at the border what is going on. I can only, watch the situation in media and try to follow the official statements. So at least Polish border guards try to say that they use completely the same standards on both parts of the borders. The difference is in the Belarusian border that migrants crossed this border, crossed the green border using force. And that's the crime according to law. That's why they are not allowed to enter territory. If they cross the border in crossing points, they are allowed to apply for asylum and they are directed to the special centers, reception centers. In Ukrainian crisis, they were allowed to cross the border even without documents. But when I was talking about being proud of, I say that I'm proud of my society, and society and NGOs are actually helping in both situations, at least try to help, because the access to the Belarusian border is limited somehow. So that's the explanation from myself. What is the explanation of the government also? At least when I was following this debate about Belarusian border, because now we don't discuss it anymore so much in Poland. We are rather focused on the situation on Ukrainian border. But explanation from the government was that actually, Ukraine is the place of it's our direct neighbor. So we are the first country, the first safe country according to international law. We are obliged to welcome refugees. In case of Belarus, we are not the first safe country according to the government. So we are not obliged to welcome those people, especially that they are crossing the border using force. And they are instrumentalized by Lukashenko's regime. That's the official explanation of the government. I don't know if I was precise, but I try to do my best to explain to explain the explanation somehow. When it comes to a relation between Poland and Hungary, I think that we can expect actually this change. I see this change already. Of course, it's a problematic issue because Hungary was useful for the Polish government in some aspects, elements of a European politics. But here, of course, in face of this huge challenge of Russian invasion and Russian aggression, I see changes in the rhetorics of the government representatives. Not all, but some symptoms of change we can already see. For example, yesterday, Prime Minister Morawiecki, for the first time, actually criticized Hungary for that, saying that this this language, what he was saying after direct election, that we don't agree with that, and that we shouldn't agree for something like this. But you know, it's really difficult to say. I think too early to say if this change will be a crucial change in all the aspects of European policy. I think that some ad hoc cooperation, at least, is just needed by the government. So I cannot say that this shift will really come.
We have 6 minutes left, so I would like to bring in the two questions, which sort of the two members of the audience who sort of raised their hands, and then have a final round all across the panel. Let's start with Rolf again, then Jolanta, and Stanislav has the last word.
On the question on the numbers of the embassy, of course, that means that they will be expelled and there won't be any successors for those people. So it affects the capability of the embassy to work. And that is different, of course, from closing the embassy, which is an end of diplomatic relations, which is much more far-reaching and would then require at one point the re-establishment of those diplomatic relations. In fact, it is quite useful to have, how can I say, eyes and ears in Moscow for the government to see what's going on. So a closure of or the end of diplomatic relations, I don't foresee for Germany at a very short period of time. I don't foresee it at all, actually. Yeah. And just one comment on Polish-Hungarian relations. It has always been clear that the relationship between Poland and Hungary on Russia was very different. Now it's even more different. But of course, they still see eye to eye when it comes to the European principle of rule of law and democracy. And I don't foresee any change here. They will continue to work together in order to avoid the consequences of this procedure. What it means, though, to Visegrad, I think Visegrad has been very much weakened by this Polish-Hungarian feud. So I'm not so sure that it will really be a change when it comes to the workings with the European Commission and the European Court of Justice.
I don't want to be very critical, but I think that assessment of German leadership is not the best in Poland, let's say. And I think what the government stress mostly is the not enough, I mean, how to say that Germany should be more open for more radical sanctions. That's the first field and the main field Germany should do more. Maybe not so much about the gesture, about visits and so on, but mainly about sanctions. As Germany is seen as the main blocking country of sanctions, actually, of really real sanctions, I mean the energy sanctions. So maybe I will just stop here.
It was an exercise in British, I say, understatement, sort of not the best. Stanislav.
Yeah, quick reply to Milan. I think seen from Chisinau, German support is very much appreciated on 3 levels. First is that relocation of refugees started from Moldova to Germany. Second element for financial support to close the budget hole. Third, the conference of donors in Berlin, which was important contribution of Germany. The last point on Transnistria resupply, I've got the question in the chat. I think there are three things in terms of resupply: troops, food, and arms. These things were happening before 2014 via Ukraine. After 2014, it stopped. Basically, Russia cannot send military supplies. Russia satisfies the logistics or food domestically through Transnistria. And the last point, in terms of rotation troops, Moldovans control via airport in Chisinau who can enter and who cannot. And there are often cases when Moldovan authorities turn away Russian officers from the Chisinau airport to fly back home.
And this is a reminder that, sort of how many dimensions this war has, and sort of how it affects us all across Europe. I draw this morning's briefing to a close. Thank you very much for attending this morning, for joining us again. Thank you very much to our three speakers, also for Rolf, sort of on short notice, sort of stepping in, much appreciated. And we will take a 2-week break now, 2 weeks break now, and hope to see you again in 3 weeks then. But you will be assured that you will get an invitation again to the next briefing, and looking forward to seeing you there again. Thank you very much and have a very good morning.